Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Valdete Berisha, and I manage FinDev Gateway. For those of you who don't know, FinDev Gateway is CGAP's knowledge-sharing platform on financial inclusion. Our webinar series is designed to help practitioners share their experiences and lessons on a wide range of topics related to financial inclusion. Before we begin with the webinar, I would like to go over a few logistical aspects. The webinar duration is 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we have allocated an hour for the webinar presentation and 30 minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask questions, please make sure to stick around and you'll hear your answers at the end. So also please note that this webinar is an audio broadcast. And what that means is that as a participant, you will be able to listen to the presentation, but your microphone will be muted throughout the webinar. And we do this in order to ensure webinar quality and to prevent distractions. However, you can still engage in two ways. You can use the chat box, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen, to submit your questions or comments. And please make sure when you submit your question or comment to select all participants. Usually it's selected by default, but in case it's not, make sure it goes to all participants, because that's the only way we can make sure that the moderator will be able to see your question and address it at the end. And also, please don't wait until the end to ask questions. You can submit your question at any time during the webinar. In fact, we prefer it that way because it helps to organize questions a little bit better. And the second way in which you can engage during the webinar is by answering our poll questions. The speakers have prepared a set of polls. We have 3 of them today that we will ask throughout the webinar, and you will get more instructions from the speakers about when and how to answer poll questions. So that's a great way for you to engage with speakers and to answer poll questions. And finally, I know that most of you usually ask this question, so we do send the webinar recording and related materials at the end, in fact, within a day or 2 of the webinar, in order to make sure that even those who couldn't join today but registered will still be able to see the material that was covered. So that's all on the logistical front. I just would like to introduce now our moderator, Antonique Conning. Antonique leads CGAP's work on customer protection and value. She's an expert in customer empowerment, employee and agent empowerment, and responsible finance. Antonique is also a contributor to CGAP's customer-centric guide and a co-author of the Employee and Agent Empowerment Toolkit, which is featured in today's webinar. So, Antonique, over to you. Antonique, can you hear us? Can you unmute your microphone?
Yes, thank you very much, Valdete, and welcome everyone. We're very excited that so many of you have joined us today to learn about empowering employees and agents. This webinar is the second in a series of CGAP webinars on customer centricity, and our webinar today aims to make one part of a manager's job easier, the part of the job that is focused on engaging and enabling other people to help deliver a valuable customer experience. So we approach the idea of employee and agent empowerment not as an end, but as the means through which the financial sector can realize more of its potential. The toolkit on which this webinar draws offers guidance for managers at all levels and in all departments, those who work with financial institutions and those who partner or are contracted to assist in financial service delivery. And I'm honored to be joined today by Cheryl Frankowitz, one of the co-authors of the CGAP Employee and Agent Empowerment Toolkit and Idea Book. Cheryl is the curator for 9 Buckets, an electronic resource portfolio supporting facilitators of learning and change that will be launched later this year. And then we're privileged to have 3 voices from the field. Caroline Gale is a former employee of the Pioneer Group in the Philippines. She has spent the last 4 years at the microinsurance department of the group to institutionalize customer centricity. She was one of the pioneer members of the customer and employee engagement team that was tasked to design and improve programs that deliver consistent and good customer experience. She's now an independent consultant. Secondly, we have Bushell, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Jumo. And Jumo is a financial services platform that connects low-income individuals and micro and small enterprises with real-time mobile financial services. Bushell is passionate about social impact through customer-focused innovation and technology, and she has held related senior leadership roles in the last couple of years. And finally, Richard Stewart is Product Portfolio Manager at Flash Mobile Vending, which is the largest informal retail network in Southern Africa. But before that, Richard worked for Zuna, a fintech startup which operates in Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique. As head of agent products at Zuna, Richard applied his customer-centric decision-making mindset to research, prototype, design, and build products for the agent network with the aim of improving agents' operations, liquidity, and profitability. But before we dive in, well, that's already warned you that we would have some polls. And we actually would like, at the start of this webinar, to take a poll and find out why you joined this webinar. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the poll question and 5 possible answers. So choose one of the 5 options to answer why you joined this webinar, and then press the submit button on the right-hand side. So did you join because you want to understand what empowerment is and how it can be useful? That's option A. Or B, you need help making the case for empowerment in your organization. Or C, you think empowerment is a good idea, but you have no idea or you're not sure how to do it in your organization. Or maybe you don't work in a financial service provider, but want to help facilitate empowerment within financial service providers, which is option D. Or last, you may want to learn how to empower yourself, which is option E. So pick your option and then click submit at the bottom. And for that, I will keep count for everyone to have a chance to click why you joined the webinar. And then we'll see the results.
Great. Thank you, Antonique. I can see that there's still many attendees who are taking the poll, so we'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer.
And this is also the first of the 3 polls, so it's an easy one to test the system out.
Yes. Okay, I think we have almost everyone who is active that has responded. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So if anyone else is just submitting an answer, you'll still have a chance to do it. But once I click close, it will take about 15-20 seconds to close. And we're going to share the results. So 13 seconds remaining.
I see some of the colleagues have submitted their answers in the chat box. So for the next poll, please click on the poll buttons itself, because that's the only way that it would count in the results. But this is a very interesting result. It also gives us a bit of a sense of the kind of people that are on the webinar. But overall, it's pretty spread. Several people want to understand more. But then I think a large portion of the people aren't working in a financial service provider themselves, but also want to learn how they can help others. So yes, this is a good idea to give us a sense of who is joining us today. Let me just move on, because given the limited time available, we cannot cover everything about employee and agent empowerment, of course, but we want to try and do 3 things this afternoon or this morning. First of all, illustrate how employee and agent empowerment can generate value. Secondly, demonstrate the employee and agent empowerment process with examples from Pioneer Microinsurance, Jumo, and Zona. And thirdly, highlight throughout the webinar tools that can support your empowerment process. We know this is still a lot to cover in an hour, but that's why we also have the 30 minutes towards the end to help answer any questions that might remain. I want to make sure that everyone knows where to find the Employee and Agent Empowerment Toolkit and Idea Book. You will find them in the resource section on CGAP's Customer-Centric Guide, but you will also find them, the direct links to them, in the chat box to the right. So with that, let's now start by understanding what employee and agent empowerment is and why it's actually needed. And for that, we will switch to our panel of providers. Caroline, Bushell, and Richard will each explain what challenge they faced in their organization that led them to focus on facilitating empowerment. And we'll start with Caroline. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Antonique. So as you can see from the graph on the slide, Pioneer Microinsurance experienced a rapid growth in business from 2013 onwards. Although the numbers look good, dissecting them will give you a different story. A large percentage of the growth is coming from new businesses. What it meant was we were good at acquiring customers but not retaining them. Pain points in the customer journey led us to suffer from high dropout ratios. Therefore, we were unable to grow the business to its full potential. With a relatively high-touch business model, meaning transactions heavy on human interaction, and an expanding workforce, the greater was our need to ensure that customer experience is managed well and remain consistently positive across all touchpoints. To overcome this challenge, we decided to shift our focus from the product to the customers. We realized that adopting customer centricity into the organization is not a one-time project, but both a strategy and culture which must be known to everyone in the organization. This means from your top management down to the operations. We wanted customer centricity to trickle down to all parts of the organization for it to work and influence customer experience.
Thanks so much, Caroline. That's an important challenge to systematize customer centricity throughout the organization. Let's now hear from Bushell, what her challenge was at Jumo that she wanted to address with empowerment. Bushell, over to you. Bushell, can you unmute yourself?
Bushell, can you hear us?
I think Bushell might have some challenges with her sound at the moment.
Bushell, can you try to unmute your microphone? It seems it's still muted, so we tested before and it worked well, so.
Otherwise, I suggest maybe we move to Richard to hear from him first, and then we come back to Bushell. Let's try that. So, Richard, let's hear from you, from Zona. What was your challenge that you tried to address with empowerment?
Yeah, thanks very much. Zona's strategy was always to focus on its agents. This was a direct output of the founders driving a very strong customer-centric culture. Thus, Zona was able to understand and support the agent network when it was still quite small. However, as the company grew, itself started to expand in its operations and product offering. More attention was given to end consumers and understanding their needs. Our initial research showed that consumers placed a high importance on the level of customer experience they received from an agent or a teller at the kiosk at the time of purchasing airtime. As Zona's agent network and consumer base continued to rapidly grow, we felt less attention was being given to our agents and that customer experience levels were becoming more inconsistent across the agent network. Further research and consumer engagement reaffirmed what we learned earlier, that this agent-teller conduct was one of the most important factors influencing consumers' experience. So we had to figure out how to better understand, enable, and motivate agents and tellers. We had to do this from a distance and at scale because we were already operating in 2 different countries and were looking to expand further. We knew we couldn't or we wouldn't be able to grow sustainably if we micromanaged our agents. So we needed agents to take more ownership of their business and to drive the delivery of quality customer experience. However, we couldn't have every agent doing their own thing. We needed to set some standards, measure performance against those standards, and empower agents to act on the results.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Richard. Let's go back to Jumo and see if Bushell is able to address us now. Bushell, can you speak? Okay, well, I think we will have to troubleshoot with Bushell's connection for just a moment, and I'll ask Cheryl, our co-facilitator, to speak on behalf of Bushell for the moment. Cheryl, can you explain the situation at Jumo at the start?
Sure. So as a financial technology company, Jumo doesn't employ loan officers or tellers or branch managers. Primarily, it employs data scientists, engineers, and other feature developers who have little or no contact with end customers. Jumo also doesn't have brick and mortar infrastructure, or it doesn't work through brick and mortar infrastructure. It doesn't have a front office. Instead, it partners with mobile network operators and financial service providers that do. And it works to build their capacity to use the Jumo platform in a way that benefits end consumers. So by 2016, Jumo had already made a high-level commitment to being customer-centric. And it had tools and processes in place that gathered customer insights, but it hadn't figured out how to feed customer insights into different areas of the business at speed, especially within a rapidly scaling and increasingly distributed business model. So what it wanted was for its staff and partners to be empowered to quickly identify relevant customer insights and act on them. It knew that wouldn't be easy because it didn't have a front office. Well, its front office was hidden within its partners. But precisely because of that, it thought that empowering staff to be customer-centric was even more important. Anthony, I think that's it.
Thank you.
And hopefully Bushell can tell us more about this story later on when she comes back in.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks so much for stepping in. So with that, we've heard the three stories of the challenges, the business challenges that each one of them are trying to address with facilitating empowerment. So Pioneer's objective is really to deliver a positive and consistent customer experience across all the touch points in the journey. Jumo wanted staff and partners to find ways to quickly and usefully act on customer insights, and Zona wanted its agents to take more ownership of their business and deliver better, more consistent customer experience. So at the end of the webinar, we'll come back to this and ask Caroline and Bushell and Richard whether their empowerment initiatives actually delivered the value that they were looking for. So since some of you indicated in the poll that your main reason for joining the webinar is to understand what empowerment is or to facilitate it in other organizations, let's dive in to get some clarity on what we actually mean with empowerment. We define empowerment drawing on the capability theory of Amartya Sen. And these three elements that you see here on the slide, choice, action, and outcome, are core to empowerment theory in general, not just empowerment in the financial sector. Empowerment must come from within employees and agents themselves. They are the ones who must, first of all, decide that they want to do something, secondly, act on their decision, and then thirdly, be able to achieve the desired outcome. And you can't empower anyone who doesn't want to be empowered. You can, however, encourage certain choices and make it easier for your employees and agents to successfully act on their choices. And this is how you facilitate empowerment. For empowerment to be worthwhile investment for a financial service provider, it has to deliver results or outcomes that are desirable or valuable to the provider, as well as the people you want to see empowered. So it's not just a nice thing to do. And when CGAP partnered with the financial service providers like Pioneer, Zona, and Jumo, we did so because we were pursuing the same outcome, greater financial inclusion through customer centricity. We're focused here on the empowerment process in the context of customer centricity for financial inclusion. Customer-centric organizations need employees and agents who are, first of all, deeply committed to delivering a customer experience that generates value for customers, for the organization, and for themselves, and secondly, to be capable of delivering that kind of experience. We will not delve deeper into the theory now, but if you want to refresh your memory about the definition of empowerment or dig a bit deeper into the theory, you'll find what you need in the introductory section of the Employee and Agent Empowerment Toolkit. Let me now hand over to Cheryl, who will take you through the empowerment process.
Thank you, Antonique. What I'm going to do is walk you through a 4-step empowerment process. As I do that, I'll invite Caroline, hopefully Bushell, and Richard to take turns commenting on how they implemented one of the steps in their organization. I'll point you to some specific resources that you can use to design and implement an empowerment process of your own, and I'll give you a chance to actually test 2 of those tools. So here you see the 4 steps of the empowerment process: assessment, analysis, prioritization, and design. I'll explain each one, but I'm going to move through the process fairly quickly, so just be aware that you can find more detail on all of the steps in part 2 of the toolkit. The first step of the empowerment process is to assess the situation. How empowered are people already? What's your starting point? There are a lot of ways to do an assessment, but we recommend starting with something quite simple so that you can quickly and easily get your bearings. We developed the empowerment matrix that you see here, and you can also find in the toolkit, to help make your initial assessment easy. As you can see, it's built around the 2 main components of the empowerment definition that Antonique walked you through. On the y-axis is engagement, which measures the extent to which your employees or agents are fully involved in and committed to the delivery of valuable customer experience. At the highest level of engagement, you'd see things like 100% employee and agent retention, people with a strong internal desire to deliver the best possible customer experience, always taking the initiative to solve customers' problems, etc. At the lowest level of engagement, you'd see very low levels of retention. People wouldn't show much interest in the customer, and they'd wait to be told what to do rather than taking the initiative. On the x-axis is ability, which measures the extent to which your employees or agents have the resources and the resourcefulness necessary to deliver valuable customer experience. At the highest level of ability, you'll never see disappointing employee or agent performance. People communicate and collaborate well, customers are highly satisfied, and as a result, business is profitable. At the lowest level of ability, customers complain about poor or inconsistent service, performance doesn't meet expectations, managers have to solve problems that employees or agents should be able to resolve themselves, and so on. To use this matrix as an assessment tool, all you have to do is picture in your mind one person or one group of people who you would like to be empowered, and then ask yourself, what is their current level of engagement? Is it high, low, medium high, medium low? Choose a point somewhere along the engagement axis and draw a line at that level. Then ask yourself, what is their current level of ability? Choose a spot somewhere along the ability axis and draw a line at that level. Where the 2 lines intersect, that's the current empowerment situation of the individual or group you're thinking about. I'm going to give you a chance now to try this out, just to make sure you understand the 2 main elements of the empowerment assessment and how to use the matrix. You'll see a new poll in the poll box on the right-hand side of your screen. Think about someone who you would like to see empowered to deliver more valuable customer experience. It could be an individual or a group of people. What is their current level of engagement and ability? In which quadrant of the matrix would you plot them? If they have relatively high engagement already, but low ability, choose option A in the poll box on the right-hand side of the screen. If they have low engagement and low ability, choose option B. If they have low engagement but high ability, choose option C. And if they have high ability and engagement, choose option D. Remember, the engagement axis measures the degree to which people are already committed to delivering more valuable customer experience. And the ability axis measures whether they have the resources and the resourcefulness to actually deliver valuable customer experience. Once you've chosen your answer, don't forget to click the Submit button at the bottom of the poll so that your answer will be registered. Valdete, how are we doing in terms of the poll's progress?
We have 36 people have already taken it, so we're still seeing a lot of many other people taking it. So we're going to give everyone a chance.
If you're having trouble thinking of who to focus on, you can also focus on yourself. I know there were a small number of you that said you are attending the webinar in order to empower yourself, so you can have yourself in mind as well. What's your current level of engagement? Are you really keen and committed and involved in delivering more valuable customer experience, or is it somewhat less than that? And how capable are you? Do you have the resources and the resourcefulness to be able to actually deliver more valuable customer experience? You can also plot yourself into one of these 4 boxes.
And also don't forget, if you don't see the submit button, just scroll a little bit and you will see it, because sometimes it's not that easy to see it. So I can see that we have 60% of people have responded. There's 3% that are still in the process. And I think we're going to close. We'll have 20 more seconds for everyone if you still are submitting an answer. Okay. 10 more seconds.
And you're going to show those results on the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll see the results in just a couple of seconds. Okay. Should be able to see them now.
All right, great. So interesting. We got a smattering of results. The largest percentage chose option A, which means you're working with people who are motivated. They want to deliver valuable customer experience, but their ability to do so needs strengthening. The other options, those of you who chose option B, so you're working with people who are what we call adrift. I'll show you on the next slide. We've given labels or names to each of the quadrants or segments to make it easier to think and talk about them. So those of you that have folks in the adrift quadrant, they're not particularly motivated or able to deliver valuable customer experience at this point in time. Those of you who chose option C, you're working with people who are competent. So they already have some ability and could deliver valuable customer experience if they wanted to, but they're not particularly motivated to do so. And those of you who chose option D, you're working with people who have high levels of engagement and ability, so they're already empowered, at least to some extent, to deliver valuable customer experience. But they may lack certain resources that restrict their engagement and or ability, and they could become even more empowered if those constraints were addressed. No matter where people are today, you can almost always find ways to strengthen ability or engagement and move people closer to the upper right-hand corner of the matrix. But you won't use the same strategy with everyone. For example, you can see here where Caroline, Bushell, and Richard plotted their teams on the empowerment matrix. It's pretty clear that JUMO needed to focus on increasing employees' ability. But Pioneer decided that it wanted to strengthen ability with engagement. And as a result, the empowerment initiatives that the 2 organizations designed ended up being quite different. You'll hear more about that as we go along. But even in the same organization, if you find groups of people in different quadrants, you might want to design different empowerment initiatives for each group. I hope you can see that the matrix tool is an easy way to get started with your assessment, but it doesn't give you enough information to design an empowerment initiative. It doesn't tell you what would make your people more capable or engaged than they are today. So once you have a general idea about the direction you want to head in, you have to dig deeper with your assessment. In our research, we identified 9 types of resources that impact people's ability and engagement. You'll see them clustered here into 3 categories, so they're easier to remember, but the categories are not mutually exclusive. In the first column, you find 3 types of resources: skills, information and knowledge, and values and attitudes. These are resources that employees and agents bring to your organization. You might be able to leverage these resources if they're already strong, or strengthen them if they're weak. But there's also the possibility that some of the skills, information, or attitudes that people bring to your organization might need to be changed or renewed in order to deliver more valuable customer experience. In the second column, there are 4 types of resources that organizations typically provide: dialogue and support, control and influence, tools and infrastructure, and rewards and penalties. This isn't to say that employees and agents don't bring their own support networks, tools, motivation, etc. They may bring some of these resources to the table, but they may not. In general, organizations are in a much stronger position to make these resources available to employees and agents than employees and agents are to secure them for themselves. In the last column, you see 2 types of resources: time and energy, and money. These resources are different from the rest because they're mostly finite. There are only 24 hours in a day, and budgets tend to be fixed for a period of time. Most organizations can't just give their employees and agents more money or time when they say they need it to deliver better customer experience. These resources can usually be strengthened best through resourcefulness. For example, by finding pain points that are sapping people's energy and addressing those pain points using resources in one of the other 2 columns, which then results in energy being freed up for other things. So in total, there are 9 types of resources. If you measure the availability and quality of each type of resource as part of your assessment process, you can identify gaps between the resources that are required to deliver valuable customer experience and those that your employees and agents currently possess. Once you know the gaps, you can decide which ones you want to tackle in your empowerment initiative. The toolkit contains a diagnostic tool that can help you assess your employees' or agents' access to the 9 types of resources. It consists of 30 questions and a worksheet that calculates a score for each of the resources based on your answers. The tool in the toolkit is designed to be used by managers, but there's another version of the tool in the idea book that can be used by individual employees and agents. And if you find that our diagnostic tool doesn't exactly fit your needs, you can always design your own. And there are tips and templates in the idea book that can guide you in the development of your own employee and agent surveys. So back to the empowerment process. Once you've done an assessment, you move quite naturally to the next step, which is analysis. Here you're trying to understand what your assessment results mean. If you use the diagnostic tool in the toolkit, you can plot the score you get for each resource on a spider diagram like the one you see here, and that can make it really easy to get your analysis going. If, for example, you got the maximum score of 4 in the area of information and knowledge, you'd make a mark where you see the orange dot on the slide. And if you scored 2.5 in the area of dialogue and support, you'd make a mark where you see the green dot. After you mark your scores for all the resource areas, you connect the dots to get a visual picture of your strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Richard now so he can share an example of his results and tell you more about how he actually used this tool for analysis. Richard?
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, while I was at Zorna, I led a team of around 8 that focused on driving agent growth through improved products, services, and support levels. We were based in Cape Town, thus geographically removed from our customers, and we had to find ways of working smarter with the agent network across 2 different countries. If any of you worked in a startup environment where the focus is on empowering entrepreneurs in the informal market, where social change and impact are important, you'll know that this can be a very difficult environment to work in. It's high stress levels and it's long working hours. I realized that a large part of my role as a leader of that team was to empower them to give their best, to support them in every way possible, and to protect them from other teams. However, in order to do that, we needed to trust each other and work together as a strong and unified unit. If we could achieve this, then I knew that the team would be able to focus 100% on the agents and providing the best possible service to them. When I got my hands on the empowerment diagnostic tool that Cheryl has just introduced, I decided to try it out with my team to see if I could find ways of empowering ourselves to better support our agents. I asked my team to rate me on several factors, as seen in the diagram, and then I in turn rated myself on how I delivered on these to each team member. A big disclaimer here, This requires you to fully embrace vulnerability and to be open to accepting feedback, either positive or negative, in a constructive manner. It was fascinating to see the areas where we were aligned and where we weren't. For example, in information knowledge, I rated myself much higher, whereas my team members rated me lower. So this tool was useful because it helped me identify my blind spots. And through engagement, we were able to address these and find ways to improve. What I loved about the tool is that it is not intrusive or attacking. It gave us a common language to use when talking about personal issues, thus creating a level playing field between line manager and staff. It also helped create a safe space for sharing and made the entire process somewhat fun, as it involved drawing and not just looking at numbers and spreadsheets. Through the process, I learned a lot about my team, but I also learned things about myself because the tool guided me through a short reflection that got me thinking in ways I hadn't before. What's interesting is that when preparing for this webinar, Cheryl asked if we had used this with our agents, and unfortunately we didn't, but I think it would be a very good tool to use with them as well as with employees. As I mentioned, my focus at the time was empowering the people I directly supervised to find ways to better support our agent network. If you're a strong team, then you're a stronger force working to accomplish your goals. I think we were successful, but we can talk more about that at the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Richard. You've moved us very nicely into a discussion of the third step of the empowerment process, which is all about prioritizing. To cost-effectively strengthen ability and engagement, you won't want to address all the issues identified in your diagnostic at once. Even if you had the ability to do so, your employees and agents would almost certainly not. So instead, you'll want to prioritize. How do you prioritize? Well, there's a number of options, but one of them is to use your spider diagram. And I'm going to give you a chance to, once again, try this out. So you'll see on this slide the results of Jumo's first empowerment diagnostic. So based on what you see and what you heard us say about Jumo when I introduced the organization at the beginning of the webinar, which resource area do you think Jumo should prioritize first? What should they focus on? Now remember, the higher the diagnostic score, the stronger that resource area is already. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the polling box, 9 possible answers. If you don't see 9 answers, just scroll down a bit and the list is there. Vote for the one area that you think Jumo should prioritize. So choose option A if you think it should prioritize the area of skills. Choose option B to prioritize values and attitudes. Option C for information and knowledge. Option D for dialogue and support. E for control and influence. Option F for tools and influence. G for rewards and penalties. H for time and energy. I if you think Jumo should prioritize money. Okay. Once you've made your choice, don't forget to click that submit button at the bottom of the poll so that we can see what you think.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I just also wanted to let you know that we have Bushell back on. I know that she's going to be back on. I would like to take this opportunity, if she can unmute her microphone to see if her sound now works while everybody's taking the poll.
Great idea. Yes, you hear me now?
Perfect, great. Welcome back.
Thank you. You did a great job, by the way, presenting the business challenge of Jumo in 2016. I was thinking maybe you don't actually need me for the rest of the webinar.
No, Bushell, don't you dare disappear. Okay, everybody, if you just vote, if you voted, we can close the poll. Bushell is here, and she's going to share with you what she actually prioritized and why. But first, we want to give you a chance to guess, and then you'll have a chance to see whether you were right or not.
Great.
Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now because I don't see anyone else responding it. So we'll share the results. Okay, so it looks like, the highest percentage voted for rewards and penalties. So you can see that 23%.
But you've got an answer for every single other bucket except for time and energy. So I think the good news there is that our audience understands the spider diagram and how to use it, because time and energy was already your strongest resource area. So they didn't think you should prioritize there, but they've got all kinds of other suggestions for you. Why don't I turn the floor over to you and let you explain what you actually did?
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's not surprising, actually, that so many people thought that we would have focused on rewards and penalties, but in fact, we didn't do that. And I think, really in thinking about what we needed to prioritize, if you look at all of these dimensions, I think it is an art and a science. So not really just looking at what is the lowest area, but really asking yourself, what intervention can you pursue for which you have the necessary conditions to succeed? So for us, we felt that, going with rewards and penalties at the start wouldn't be fair, because how do you reward or penalize people if they don't yet have the tools and infrastructure to do what they need to do, the knowledge and information, and if you don't have the right dialogue platforms? And for us, this was even more important because of the fact that the majority of our employees, which we call Jumanauts, are technical specialists, right? And they're knowledge workers. So it was really important that we had that in place. We wanted to be sure that there was clarity of expectations and roles, and that when we introduced rewards and penalties, it would be perceived as fair. And I think that in any empowerment program, it's really important that you ensure that things are fair to keep people engaged. And we felt that if we had gone with rewards and penalties first, we wouldn't have achieved that. So what we actually did is we chose to leverage something which we knew would work because of what our greatest strength was, right? The fact that people were highly engaged. You may recall from the matrix that Cheryl shared earlier in the assess stage that was not something that we perceived as a problem. So knowing that we had high engagement, we prioritized putting in place the right tools and infrastructure, the dialogue platforms, and spreading the information and knowledge. And for us, we found that that was greatly successful, and it gave us really the right kind of platform, after which we could then add the rewards and penalties. And in fact, probably I think by end of 2016, we introduced the customer experience score to the company scorecard, which effectively linked customer experience to remuneration. So that's the approach that we took.
Great, thanks, Bushell. I really appreciate how you highlighted the different factors that might need to be taken into consideration when identifying priorities. Naturally, we want to strengthen areas of weakness, but we also want to leverage the strengths, and we want to do that in a way that addresses business priorities. So you gave us a great example of that. I want to move on now to the last step of the empowerment process, which you see here. By the time you get here, you're going to know whose ability or engagement you want to strengthen, and you'll also know what resource or resources you want to focus on. So your next step is to decide what actions you will take to try to accomplish your empowerment goal. We've chosen our words very carefully here. This last step is all about experimentation. You shouldn't expect that the first thing you do is going to be the only thing you need to do. And in fact, this last step is a process in itself, as you'll see on the next slide. Those of you who have any kind of background in customer-centric design will recognize this slide. It's a standard design cycle, and we recommend following it when you try to design an empowerment experiment. It starts off with preparation. You'll have already done some preparation during your assessment, analysis, and prioritization. But you might want to do more before you're ready to create your design. For example, you might want to get other people involved or secure buy-in from the departments that control the resources you want to leverage. You'll probably want to gather additional information or insight to inform the design of your experiment. Maybe you'll want to understand a couple of implementation options better before you choose between them. That's the kind of thing that happens during the learning phase. In the creating phase, you decide what you want to do. Part 3 of the toolkit contains 80 pages of ideas for strengthening the 9 resource areas, and you can draw from those during this phase. I know that a lot of you aren't actually working inside financial service providers. You're supporting them, and you want to help them perhaps in this process of creation. So looking through part 3 of the toolkit would be a good way for you to figure out what kind of resources you might be able to provide to support that process. Often, you can facilitate empowerment very cost effectively by simply increasing people's awareness of or access to resources that already exist. Next comes testing. You try something out and you see if it works. Ideally, you start with something small, perhaps one component of a larger initiative. And then very soon after you start testing, you start measuring. You don't wait to measure until the test is over. That's a big part of what makes the design process iterative. Ideally, you'll be measuring and learning throughout the testing phase, which may lead to changes in the design of your experiment so that you eventually arrive at a cost-effective solution. Once you do, then you scale it, perhaps by making the experiment permanent or by extending the same kind of resources to a larger number of employees or agents. You can read more about how to design an experiment in part 2 of the toolkit, so I'm going to stop here and turn things over to Caroline so that you can hear how Pioneer actually implemented this process. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. So overall, we followed the cycle that Cheryl just described. Our preparation began, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, when we made the strategic decision to empower our employees to be customer-centric. Once we decided that we were going to do that, we had to assess what kind of programs we already had that catered to our employees. Could we work through those programs, or did we have to create something new? One of the existing programs we identified was the 1 to 2 day orientation for new employees. It was a classroom session facilitated by human resources that discussed Pioneer's mission, vision, values, and organizational structure. But it did not zoom in on the purpose of microinsurance, who is the bottom of the pyramid, what is customer centricity, and why it's important or how to do it. Given the pace of growth in our workforce, we decided we should start systematizing customer centricity at the beginning of the employee journey, so that all new employees would understand it from the moment they come in. We did the field research to understand the gap between what employees knew about our customers and what they didn't, so that we could address the gaps in the design of the onboarding program. So we interviewed employees and gathered insights from customers. Drawing from the results of the research, we were able to identify 6 qualities of a customer-centric employee. We organized a co-creation workshop with 2 consultants specializing in design thinking and organizational development, together with representatives across all teams from different levels to create an onboarding kit. The onboarding kit is a 5 to 6 month learning plan that includes going through self-learning modules and customer and departmental immersions, to name a few. Before rolling out, we presented the draft to the team leaders. This helped us identify skills other than customer centricity that new employees would need in order to carry out their roles effectively. To measure the effectiveness of the program, we had embedded online quizzes in between modules. There also are small research projects such as customer interviews and mystery shopping. The findings are then presented to a select group to gauge the new hires' customer insighting skills. We encourage conversations to happen at least once a month. Formal evaluation is often done on the 1st, 3rd, and 5th months. All in all, a combination of these efforts let us know how the 6 qualities are being reflected. So through testing the kit, we were able to identify points for improvement, such as 1, creating modules to hone technical skills based on function, 2, instilling a culture buddy to ensure belongingness, and a work buddy who is responsible in supporting and mentoring the new employee, 3, expanding beyond onboarding. Learning is a continuous journey. We realized that we must develop programs that would cater to employees in differing life cycles. This gave birth to the idea of programs tackling succession and leadership. We have also developed the Defenders of Customer Centricity, which is a gamified knowledge application. Similar to the design cycle, employees are encouraged to identify and take on a business challenge to resolve. This program has not yet been implemented, but could be a potential follow-up in the future. Cheryl?
Great, thanks, Caroline. Maybe I'll just add that another way Pioneer is planning to scale is by offering the onboarding program to new hires in its provincial branches, because until now, only new hires at the head office have gone through the program. The big challenge, of course, is the remoteness of those branches. So Pioneer's looking at identifying onboarding managers in the field who would be trained to work across teams and provide a bridge between the branches and the employee engagement team at the head office. So that's another experiment that might be tested in the near future. There's a full-length case study about Pioneer's empowerment initiatives, as well as those of Zona, Jumo, and 5 other financial service providers in the idea book. Reading their stories is a great way to get an idea of what's possible and to see how the empowerment process actually works on the ground. The idea book also has 23 tools and templates in it, some of which we've already mentioned, and some of which you see visualized here. When you're ready to design your own experiment, I highly encourage you to have a look at them because they might be able to inspire or even guide your initiative. Before turning the floor back over to Antonique, I'd like to make you aware of one final resource. It's a set of planning tools that CGAP created for use in its training workshops. If you decide to organize a workshop with others in your organization to design an empowerment experiment, you might find them useful. The tools cover content from part 3 of the toolkit. So they don't contain anything new, but they package the content so that it can be used interactively in a workshop setting. If you're interested in getting your hands on these materials, just send Antonique an email explaining what you want to do, and she'd be happy to make them available to you. Isn't that right, Antonique?
That's correct, absolutely. The more interest, the better. So let's now turn back to our panelists and learn what value they got from their respective empowerment efforts and initiatives. And we're aware that you've only heard parts of it, most of it just now from Pioneer, but we'll obviously have more time later to expand on it. Caroline, let's start with you because we just heard from you. Tell us how you see the results of the empowerment initiatives kind of play out and what value Pioneer Microinsurance got from these initiatives. Over to you.
Thank you, Antonique. So during our journey, we learned that customer centricity demands an organization to structure itself around the customer. With this strategy, you will find that your organization is able to organically evolve with your customers, giving rise to sustainable business growth. To systematize customer centricity, our head had to restructure the organization, including the creation of an employee engagement team. The team was responsible for creating a holistic and positive employee experience. This includes the creation of efficient programs that will equip employees with the necessary knowledge and skills to take ownership of the customer experience. The onboarding program is only one of several initiatives that Pioneer Microinsurance implemented. To date, as shared by the current employee engagement team, 25.68% of new hires have gone through the onboarding program. The combined initiatives to empower employees resulted in better customer experience, as shown in the improvement of the problems handling rating and voice of the customer index, which you can see from the slide. Experience is a big differentiator for financial service providers. If you want to ensure that the experience is consistent and positive for your customer, you have to begin with shaping a consistent and positive experience for your employees as well.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And we just heard from Cheryl already that the idea of the team is to expand the onboarding program, of course, to all the new hires. And then I understand that Pioneer wants to continue develop an evaluation method to see how the onboarding program correlates to employees' performance and turnover. So that will be interesting to follow as well. From here, let's now hear from Bushell. I hope we can hear her to listen to the value that Jumo got from the different initiatives that Jumo took. Bushell, over to you.
Thanks, Antonique. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can. Very happy.
Wonderful. Great. So I really just chose to highlight 3 key initiatives and kind of the success that was linked to rolling these out. I think that, at the core, like I said, what we really wanted to do was to embed independent customer-centric decision-making. And we had constantly at the back of our mind the fact that we were scaling so rapidly. I think at the time we were looking at doubling the staff complement, and we were, highly distributed geographically as well. So the first initiative was simply customer operating principles, and I see from the questions that one of the things people are asking is, this sounds expensive. And this was really something that we just developed internally, and it was about alignment, right? We wanted to make sure that we had a framework that articulated our values, that could guide our actions on the platform, where we have multiple engineering teams working on features and benefits at the same time. We wanted to make sure that in everything that we do, we were all working towards the highest common denominator, right? So these operating principles are organized according to themes like how to create financial value or responsible stewardship of customer data. And what that meant was that whether someone was in data systems or product or decision science, customer service, they essentially had some kind of scaffolding for independent decision making in their day-to-day job. So that was the first initiative. The second one was really around knowledge flow for action. So we had a deep commitment really around this whole customer agenda from our investors, and so our board subcommittees like the Social and Ethics Committee. So we were able to make some investment in deepening our research agenda. But what we did on top of that was really to build the processes that would allow us to systematize that, right, in how we understand the customer experience. So at what point do we do research? How does that data flow into the different teams? And we branded this Customer Pulse. So it was all of the research, the reporting, and also an engagement platform. And in our case, we used an existing engagement platform in the business, which is a Slack channel, where we spoke about what we were seeing in the research. And in that way, we were able to break it up into bite-sized chunks for people to consume and see what they needed to do in their respective areas. And then we were also able to celebrate successes where people actually addressed certain issues, and we would highlight what the benefits of addressing a specific thing was, for instance, deepening access for an excluded segment like women, etc. The third initiative is really one around measurement, right? And for us, we developed our own customer experience measurement methodology, which blends some traditional approaches like your CSAT and NPS, but also looks at mixing qualitative and quantitative data. So it's essentially a balanced scorecard. And we introduced that into the business, and we did that in a way which was really simple and cheap. So we always designed for what exists and meet the customers where they are. The technology we used was USSD survey tools and two-way SMS, which allowed us to get the feedback that we wanted, and also get richer voice of customer feedback like free text feedback, etc. So in terms of what results we saw, I think what was really interesting for us was that if you look at these results, which are also displayed on the slide, you can see that there was clearly value being generated for our partners who are mobile network operators, payment operators, banks, etc., because the number of financial product brands offered on the platform doubled, right? There was clearly value being created for our customers because we could see the overall EPS score rising from 83.2 to 85.9, with, if you break that up into other ecosystems, big jumps in certain ecosystems that had been lagging because we were able to diagnose issues and deal with them more effectively. From a social impact perspective, we were able to start deep diving into which segments were not happy, where was the friction in the customer journey. And so for us, seeing the number of women, specifically on the credit products, increasing was a huge win, because that's one of the products where women lag and take up, it's a lot better on savings products. So, and then the last two really point to commercial benefit, right? So in one instance, we looked at on-time repayments increasing based on insights that we had identified through the EPS and research processes. And in the period which which was under review in the initial case study in the book, the customer base had grown to over 5 million. And if any of you saw the updated blog that Antonique, Cheryl, and I co-authored end of last year, you'd have seen that we are now, over 10 million customers. So we continue to reap huge benefits from these initiatives. And as I said, they were all really very simple, very accessible.
Great. Thanks so much, Bushell. And I like that you point out the value that it generated for different parts, the business, the customers, as well as partners and your employees. So a great and powerful story, which indeed people can read more about in the idea book. I'm quickly moving over to Zona. Richard, for you to share with us the value that you've generated.
Yeah, thanks very much. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, my team wanted Zona's agents to take more ownership of the business and to drive improvements in customer experience. So through this empowerment matrix, we found that agents really wanted that. They were motivated and highly engaged to make improvements, but we weren't making it easy for them to take this initiative. Thus, their ability was low. So Zona collected a lot of data and stored it in-house. We used this and we analyzed this to guide our decisions and the guidance we gave to agents. But we didn't make the data available to agents themselves. The online agent portal changed that, and it was a key driving force for agent empowerment. By co-creating an improved version of the agent portal and providing agents with easy access to relevant data that they needed, agents could timelessly make decisions themselves and take the initiative to implement changes that improve the quality and consistency of customer experience. Some data, for example, that we provided to them were outlet details, live transactions, net promoter scores, and self-help tools. We saw that the usefulness and impact of the portal demonstrated this by the speed of which agents took it up. In just 4 months, we went from less than 2% of our agents using the portal on a weekly basis to more than 25% using it. In Malawi, 91% of the top agents were using it regularly, which demonstrates its value as a performance tool. Through this, we also saw that agent retention increased, that they were more engaged in their business. But as proud as I am of the portal itself isn't the only story. The portal is one of several resources that Zona provided to agents that made it easier for them to deliver customer experience that was valuable to both them and to consumers and ultimately to Zona. I encourage you to read the two resources on the CGAP website to learn more. From all of these combined initiatives, customer satisfaction rose significantly by 11%, and teller behaviors and habits improved. Thus, Zona was able to maintain its competitive advantage. It's important to remember that there's always more to be done, but the investments we made in empowering our people were worth it. They made good business sense.
Thanks so much, Richard, and also thanks to Caroline and Bushell. And I think, as you can all tell, the value that these businesses extracted from facilitating empowerment of their employees or agents are very wide-ranging. And I just wanted to share this slide briefly because we summarized also in the toolkit some of the main aspects of value that can be created for employees and agents in the first place, but then also for their managers, the businesses, and the customers, of course, most importantly. We're running a little behind schedule, so I'm quickly moving to the last section of the presentation. I hope really that the overview we've given you gives you a good sense of how valuable it can be to facilitate empowerment and how this can result in a win-win for the business, employees, and customers. I want to go back to the beginning of the webinar where those of you who shared wanted to learn more and understand more about what empowerment is and how useful it can be. I hope this presentation has given you some insights. If you want to recommend these resources to others or to make the case for empowerment within your organization, then we recommend that you start with the first part of the toolkit, which gives you the introduction, and it also, the table of content can then help you guide people to specific sections of the toolkit that you think are most relevant for them. You might also read through the case studies. Cheryl's already mentioned the number of the different financial service provider case studies that we have in the idea book that can really give examples about how empowerment works. If you want to start using the toolkit to strengthen the engagement and ability of the people that you supervise, Part 2 will walk you through the process of creating your own empowerment initiatives, as Cheryl explained. Well, Part 3 then gives you, as well as the idea book, gives you details about the specific resources and strategies that you might want to use and include in your initiatives. And given that most of you answered that you don't work in a financial service provider, Cheryl has already mentioned the path that you can walk, specifically focusing on this Part 3 with the 9 different kinds of resources very well explained and specific practices indicated that can enable other organizations to empower their employees and agents. And finally, if you want to empower yourself, then the next step for you is to go to the idea book, where you can use the individual employee assessment tool to diagnose your own situation, and then look at Part 3 of the toolkit for ideas and practices that can help you strengthen your areas of weakness. So hopefully you all now find yourself in one of these 4 situations and are ready to get started on your empowerment journey. I just want to give a reminder that you can find both the toolkit and the idea book among several hands-on toolkits and experiments that are in the customer-centric guide on the CGAP website. Let me open the floor now for questions. We have about 25 minutes left. I've already gathered quite a lot in the chat box, but keep going, keep adding questions. If we don't get to the questions, we promise that we will answer them after the session, and they will also be posted. So please leave your questions in the chat box. I've already gathered a few, and I will hand them to the different panelists now. There's a couple of questions related to agents for Zona, for Richard, that I'll start off with, and then questions for Jumo and for Caroline, a question on the ROI. Cheryl, I will also come back to some to you with some questions, but let's start with questions from Ian Robertson and Andrew. Richard, they would actually like to know how you established standards among agents and then ensured that they were implemented consistently. So maybe you can respond to that question before we move on.
Yeah, thanks very much for the questions. Yeah, so I think coming down to the standards among agents, from my experience, that all started with segmenting. So we had to segment our agents correctly and really understand their journey as an agent. And then we needed to understand the standards that consumers expected from them. So in terms of segmentation, you know, we tried to develop quite a wide segmentation based on transaction volume, number of kiosks that each agent had, location. So are they urban, are they rural, and what are their behaviors were some of the examples. Because bearing in mind that every segment will require a different service or support level. So what we found is that through the journey life cycle of an agent, a starter agent who has literally just come in as a first-time agent, they have their first kiosk, their needs and the business needs are very different to that of a super agent who has, we had 40-plus kiosks. So there's a lot more hand-holding, a lot more standards that would be different for a starter agent compared to a super agent. So that's how we sort of started to segment the standards among them. And then what was really important is to co-create these standards with agents to ensure buy-in. And that's what we did through a lot of agent forums. So we would go in and we would discuss, this is what customers want, what do you think is important? And we start co-creating that. And through those initiatives, we are able to co-create actually our agent lifecycle through that, the standards, and also start defining the Net Promoter Score and what we would start measuring. So in terms of implementing it, it was very much a tiered approach, and through trader forums, we were fortunate to have at Zona to have a big field team to implement this, and then through that we were able to do quarterly reviews of Net Promoter Scores. We did lots of mystery shopping, And then based on the output of all the research and the scores that we got back, we linked these standards to expansion criteria. So in order for agents to expand their business, not only did they have to hit the transaction volume, but they also had to hit these different standards, which crossed also behavioral aspects.
Great, thanks so much. Before we move on, Richard, just one other question that I think would be good for you to address. Bushell already responded to Julia's question about the cost of these investments and what your view is on the return on investment. Can you maybe briefly comment on that before I move to Caroline with questions from her?
Yeah, absolutely. The cost of having a field team is always going to be high, but I think what's important for the business that Zona is in is that the closer you are to the customer, the better insights you're going to get, which means the better your product fit will be. And it really comes down to co-creating with your customer or your agent and using a lot of the design thinking methodology and principles to get a product that's going to really fit and design a service and standards that are acceptable and will be taken on. Just in terms of the onboarding, I think culture is so important. And in terms of the cost of doing onboarding and making sure that you're designing for customer centricity, I think just a culture fit is so important because that drives through the organization. I hope that answers that question.
Thanks so much, Richard. Caroline, I want to ask the same question to you. So this is Julia's question about the cost of these different initiatives and investment and how you view the return on investment. And maybe I'll add one more question on that from Chris. Chris identified that Pioneer's biggest challenge, of course, as you mentioned at the beginning, was the dropout and the churn. And he's wondering how you see that the empowerment initiatives have actually affected that. But maybe start with a question on the return on investment.
Okay. Thank you, Antonique. So if you don't mind, I'll just have to tell the story of how our journey with Pioneer Microinsurance was. So when we decided to adopt customer centricity, we had to get the buy-in of the top management. And you are correct. You should present to them the positive impact of customer centricity to your business. So if you try to look at the executive summary on the customer-centric guide of CGAP, there it will be shown that, for example, there would be if you are able to retain at least 2% of your customers, then you would have lowered your costs at 10%. So that's how. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yes, and again, on the next question, can you say a little bit more about the churn that you actually, in terms of what information you have on that?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
I know it's a challenge, but maybe you can explain the challenge you have.
Okay, sure. Okay. So as you can, going back to the case study of Pioneer Microinsurance, we had high dropout rates because when you try to look at the customer journey, there are just so much pain points within, and our employees were not skilled enough, were not empowered enough to address those pain points. So what happens is that people drop out because of those pain points without being resolved. So what happened was, with the initiatives that we have with employee engagement, we tried to develop the skills that employees would need to address most problems that customer experience during their journey. And so it affected the renewal ratio.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'll now move to Bushell. You already answered one question as you were speaking. But there's a couple more questions that were raised for you. One by Petronella, who wants to, I think she was surprised to hear that you were tackling 3 issues, 3 resources at the same time. So maybe you can comment a little bit on how you juggled that. And then Anne Lucia has a question about your customer experience score, which you actually later on, after she posed the question, already explained a bit more. But she would also like to know a little bit how you use qualitative data in the mix.
Great. You're still hearing me, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'll start with the question around tackling all 3 resources at once. And I think that the way in which we did it was actually really simple, right? And for us, the 3 were interconnected, and then we just iterated with new interventions, right? So, for instance, we started with a tool which was the survey EPS survey methodology, where we used qualitative and quantitative data. We workshopped that, so that was the whole dialogue and support. We worked with the business through that, and we were generating deeper insights through that. So the 3 are actually related. And we did the same with every single new intervention that we introduced, whether it was customer health reporting or whatever it was. It was really making sure that, once you've built these tools, you actually have something flowing through them, but that you're also engaging with people to make sure that it is fit for purpose, it is being used, etc., and iterating. So it's actually it wasn't as daunting as it might sound there, and we built it up from there. Then the second question, I think, was the one about qualitative data. So the qualitative data that I was talking about, specifically with regards to the EPS customer methodology, is really the free text feedback that we would get from customers via USSD or two-way SMS. And the way in which we work with that data is we actually code it. So we code it into the relevant themes, and then kind of using a grounded theory approach, we then start to test and see, like, how are the themes related, what's driving what, which segments are affected by specific issues, etc. So that's a really great way to also really understand, and compare sentiments across different geographies and ecosystems. What was the third question, Antonique?
No, I think it was only 2 questions, because Anne Lucia's other question you already addressed as you explained more about the customer experience score and the EPS. So I think this is fine. Thank you. Thanks so much. But before I move to Cheryl, maybe I'll quickly respond to the question that Rishabh asked. He was wondering whether the employee and agent empowerment approach that we've presented in this sector for the financial inclusion space has its unique challenges, or how it might differ from other sectors. And my view actually is that as we've developed this toolkit and the idea book and have come up with different tools and tips, we've actually found that the empowerment notion and how you can facilitate empowerment is actually more universal than I would have probably anticipated initially. What I do think is important, and I emphasize that at the beginning, is that we use this notion of facilitating empowerment as a means and not as an end in itself. The end is actually to improve the customer experience, to create that valuable customer experience. So the empowerment is a tool to achieve that, and I think that is what we're trying to keep a crystal focus on in the toolkit and the idea book to help customer-centric organizations move that forward. But I could easily see that some of the tools and approaches that we present could be valuable in other areas where people indeed try to deliver a valuable customer experience, delivering other products or services. So let me hand over to Cheryl now to address Timothy's question on control and influence, which is indeed one of the resources that might be most difficult to understand and possibly implement. And I think Etana's question is also somewhat linked to that when it comes to delegation and empowering people in your organization. So Cheryl, maybe you can comment on those 2 questions, and if you have any other points that you'd like to add on comments that the other panelists have made, please do so. After you do that, I'll give another round to each of the panelists to make any final comments. So Cheryl, over to you.
Okay, so let's focus in on those two questions. The control and influence resource. How does it work as a resource? And I think perhaps it's easier to think about this if you look at the definition of what's in that bucket. So what's in that bucket are actually opportunities. And they're opportunities to take decisions, to act, or to influence others, right, in acting in pursuit of valuable customer experience. So what might that look like? Freedom of expression is a resource. Opportunities to make decision within one's own realm of responsibility, carrying out day-to-day tasks. Opportunities to influence the future of the organization or one's team, or even one's own targets for the next period. Opportunities to expand one's realm of responsibility. The freedom to exercise one's rights, knowing what those rights are as an employee and being able to exercise them. And accountability. You may think it's funny to think about accountability as an opportunity, but the best way to make performance parameters matter is actually to hold people responsible for delivering what they say they're going to deliver, and for repairing any customer relationships that are damaged as a result of their failure to deliver what they promised. Yeah? So these are examples of some of the different resources that fall into that category. And the way they work is that you as a manager or as a partner, you might provide more of those resources to a particular person or a particular team that will either motivate them or engage them more in the process of customer experience delivery, or make them more capable of doing it. You know, sometimes people can't do what they want to do because they don't have the authority to do so. And so that bucket of resources becomes very important. Antonique, I think you're right that Gaetano's question is quite related. Gaetano, you are asking about the size of institutions and does the tool work for everybody? Our experience thus far suggests that it is a very flexible tool. We were thinking of that as we designed it as a framework for diagnosis and design. But you seemed particularly concerned with larger organizations and with this bucket of control and influence in particular. So I think, you know, as I struggled to think about this bucket, I realized that although it's true some people just love power and they never want to share, they don't want to delegate anything, most people that have power and control, they don't delegate because they're afraid to delegate. It's risky to delegate. It's uncomfortable to delegate. You're going to give something that you know you can do well, and you're going to give it over to somebody else that's perhaps never done it before, and you're going to hope that you get good results. It's scary. Why would you do that? There has to be a reason to do that. And so I actually think that this framework is a powerful way to help any manager, including top managers, be able to understand that sometimes it is a valuable resource, being able to give someone a little bit more control or influence for a particular purpose. And that goes back to what Antonique was saying at the very beginning of the webinar. You don't decentralize or delegate just because it's a nice thing to do. You do it for a reason. And if managers think about that bucket in a strategic way, and they think about how, in very practical terms, in one of the areas that I just mentioned, and that you can read about more in part 3 of the toolkit, there might be one specific thing that they can hand over in order to achieve a specific goal with that specific individual or team. That really helps to manage the risk and the discomfort associated with it. It can also help the manager to support and guide, which is another bucket, dialogue and support, that employee or that team of employees to be able to better execute that new responsibility or opportunity that they've been given, hold them accountable for delivering what they promise, and help them learn from whatever failure or lack of performance that results so that they can deliver better results moving into the future, right? So I actually think this is an extremely valuable tool to be able to help managers see how they can delegate in a way that is productive and less scary, less risky, more successful. Antonique?
Thanks so much, Cheryl. And I see other comments coming in on control and influence and delegating power as well. So this is a particularly important point, and I hope that the toolkit will help people think this through. I'll now hand over to Caroline, Bushell, and Richard. You'll all get each 1 minute to conclude. I know that there's still a couple of questions pending, but I'm not sure you will have a chance to comment in your final minute. But there is a question for all of you about board engagement. How did you get your board to, or whether your board was involved, and how did you get them on board with these engagements? And then there is one more question from Ian. Ian, I think we will have to take that one offline because our time is not permitting, but at least one part of your answer you could find in the blog article that Bushell just promoted. But let me hand over to Caroline for a final reaction. Caroline.
Okay, thank you, Antonique. Okay, so how were we able to get the buy-in of our top management, right? So aside from presenting to them the return of investment or the positive impact that customer centricity has to the business, what we did was we tried to isolate the adoption of customer centricity in the beginning within microinsurance, because from what our participants have been saying, it's quite difficult to move parts of organization, especially when they're already that big. So what we decided and did was to isolate it first within microinsurance, prove that it really works based on the metrics that we have set, and once that we have proven that customer centricity works in microinsurance, that's when the other departments can follow through.
Okay, thanks so much, Caroline. Bushell, a final comment from your side?
Great. Yeah, so I think that, from our perspective, we were quite fortunate in that we did start off with, I think, relatively a high level of buy-in because of the makeup of our board, with our investors being predominantly social impact investors. That said, I think that the level of engagement has increased, quite significantly as we've been working on these interventions. And I think the things that really drove that was, first of all, really creating visibility around the data. So we have a social and ethics board subcommittee where we report on customer and social impact, and we've done significant work in really bringing some of this data to the fore and showing how the investment in the customer research is leading to better take-up, is leading to better reach in, excluded segments like agri or women, and really putting the numbers to it. I think that's really key. I think, in talking about this, it's important to not just give the final number like return on investment, but really to help, senior stakeholders understand the links between actions and the consequences, right? The consequences or the results, whether it's return on investment or a risk being created that needs to be mitigated. So that's, that's kind of my answer around the senior stakeholder engagement. And just a reflection, I think, in closing for me and thinking about this empowerment to create customer value and embed customer-centric decision-making is that it is an action learning process. It's what we've seen and what we continue to see, and that, the most important thing is to just start with, wherever you are with what you have, look for some small wins and then build on those. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bushell. Very good reflection to end over. Richard, a quick last minute before I hand it over back to Valdete.
Super, thank you. Yeah, I think very similar to Bushell there. We were very fortunate that our board was very engaged. Also, social impact investors, as well as the founders and execs, were actually the custodians of customer centricity. So driving this was actually very easy in the business, if I put it that way, and it was built into the foundations of how we worked. But it's important to start small, I think, and do proof of concepts on customer centricity and ways of working, and showing the results and sharing the stories. And very similar again to what Bushell has done is we made it very visual. Throughout the office, you saw the customer, you saw the agent, you saw the face, the stories, and it all resonated, and you couldn't actually miss it. So when you see that all the time, you start living it, and you're sharing those stories, and I think that's super important. And just to finish and to recap, it's very much embracing a childlike sense of curiosity, is get into the market and listen and understand to your customers and your agents, and ask questions, and through that you can co-create and design with them. And I think that's where it has to start.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. Very, very good last word. So I just want to thank Cheryl, Caroline, Bushell, and Richard for great input, lots of good reflections, and I'm handing over back to Valdetta.
Thank you, Antonique, and thank you to everyone for sharing your experiences and insights with the FinDev Gateway audience. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I hope all of you did.